just so many different ways that people can be religious, and there's no absolute scale which is very useful in trying to assess this. In relation to Islam, people ask the question, well, do they pray 5 times a day? Well, what if somebody doesn't think that praying 5 times a day is the heart of Islam like you do? I mean, it's the outside analyst saying, well, praying 5 times a day is the measure of a true Muslim. But there are many Muslims that simply don't share that view. And any of the measures that are used to try to figure out what these levels of piety are have the same problem. If we explore what people actually do, then there's just so much diversity of different approaches, and each of these approaches can be seen as having its own integrity and its own authenticity and its own strength in some ways. We may find indeed that very heavy alcohol drinkers might be ready to pick up guns under a banner of radical Islam or something like that. I mean, there's just no way to predict what the absolute criterion of piety should be assessed as. But you also raise this matter of externality versus internality, the suggestion that we can only judge based on what we see them doing, their ritual practice or something like that. But I don't think that's true. I think that we can also judge, or we can also understand people based on what they say about what they believe. And why should we take less seriously what a Christian believer says about his belief or her belief than we take seriously what Dostoevsky wrote in his book? I mean, what each person is creating their own texts about themselves. We might think that there's problems with the way that they present themselves, they may, for example, say that praying 5 times a day is the key to being a true Muslim, and they also might consider themselves to be true Muslim, but they might not pray 5 times a day. There are all sorts of contradictions between what people think about themselves and how they construct their narratives about themselves when they're presenting themselves to others, which may differ from the picture that we get if we observe them. But it doesn't mean that what they say is less important or worth disregarding. And I think that one of the keys to understanding other people's religious worlds is to listen to what they say and listen to what they say when they're talking to each other, not just when they're talking to you, when you're asking specific kinds of questions. It is a challenge. I mean, all this is a very interpretive matter, just like any complex social process, it seems to me. But nevertheless, I think that we have to take seriously the internal dimension as well. Otherwise, we can't understand ritual either, for that matter. I mean, if we just watch people do, but don't what people do, but don't ask them, well, why are you doing this, and what does it mean to you? Then we won't really learn much about ritual either.
It seems to me that the objective of a scholar is to examine the subject without any interruption into it, so anyway, not affecting the subject of his study. It seems that studying religion in a university would kind of further tip the balance in a way to a secular society, and it seems kind of a contradiction between the objective of a university and the role it's playing in society.
Yeah, the notion that the main project of study is to study without affecting the thing that you're studying. Well, there's the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, which in physics suggests that that's impossible, that our observation itself, even in the realm of physics, he even quantifies the way that our observation affects the way that our observations then appear, the process of our observation. So this notion of the ability for us to keep that distance from our subject, I think, even in physics, I mean, it's been questioned, and it certainly is questioned in other realms. And it's not even, I would say, it's not particularly the goal when we're talking about the study of poetry, for example. I mean, if somebody's, we're of course not affecting the way Robert Frost or Shakespeare writes their poems, but we are entering into we can fully engage, and we can write poems ourselves. We can change the shape of the poetic world by our own contributions. There's nothing wrong with that. When it comes to studying people, there is, of course, a problem that we don't want to be always running into the things that only happen because we're there. That is, If we go into a church and suddenly everybody stands up, we don't want to come out of the church and say, well, these people always stand up. We want to be able to have a sense of what they do when we're not there. But it doesn't mean that we have the possibility of engaging the social world that we observe without having any impact on it. We have to always take account of the impact of our presence there. And it's always a dialectic, it seems to me. It's not even necessarily such a bad thing that our presence there has an impact. Sometimes that actually reveals things that are important for us to understand. But about this matter of increasing secularization, and maybe you could rephrase your question. I'm not sure if I understood it quite.
Well, and it seems to me that the problem there, I mean, it was, in a way, a revolt against religion. It seems to me it was a revolt against the centralization of religion. So it's not, the movement of people towards secularity, it's rather the movement of people towards decentralized religion. Now, religion, if taught in university, which I do not oppose, anyway, but if it's taught in university, it would perhaps affect the society on the social level, a deep level that is not only scholarly, but also create a generation which is more secular than the previous one because of the university, not because of the general mood of the people.
The modernizing project in universities was certainly to try to create a more secular, educated class. That's not the only effect it had on the relationship between society and religion, of course. And there are many ways that one could point to the way that American universities also sustain a kind of religiosity. But that certainly was the general project. Whether that's a good or bad thing, I'm not sure. I mean, I myself have my own set of values, but I don't actually believe that there's one set of values that would work best for everyone and for all time. And I think that as secularization proceeds or decreases, what we can do as intellectuals is assess the impacts of that to figure out whether we like what we see, whether we like what's happening. But ultimately, also, I suppose, as intellectuals, as public intellectuals, we can try to influence it as well, the direction that we think is most congenial, is better for the wider public. But I wouldn't want to prejudge what actually is best. I think that's a question that we need to explore.
When a person studies for years without studying a religion, without studying any ethical question, I think the impact will not be good. Like the person who is only smart and is not spiritual is not a complete person. And from the other part, the person who studies religion a lot, he becomes highly spiritual and not really intellectual. And I want to ask how to teach spirituality and evolve these training believers.
You mentioned two different things, I think, that are maybe worth making distinct. One is ethics and another spirituality. I don't want to say that they're absolutely distinct from one another, but to train somebody to be really smart but not ethical, I think this, as you know what I mean, it creates potentially serious problems. In my own field of anthropology, for example, ethics is an integral part of training as an anthropologist because of precisely what I was talking about a moment ago, where you're constantly interacting with people. You have to make sure that your interactions and your impacts are that you're ready to defend in ethical terms what those impacts are. The matter of spirituality, I think, is a bit more difficult. That is, you can say, for example, that a person should also have a spiritual dimension, and that's better. But that I think is a value judgment, and I might agree with you as well. But to say, for example, that in order to graduate from a program in literature or anthropology from a university, I think one could definitely say that you should have some training in ethics, but to require that you also be spiritual, I think that would be a bit hard. That is, there's so many different ways that people can understand themselves as being spiritual. Spirituality is so much more difficult to define and difficult to contextualize even within the context of the things that we're talking about. I think that it's great to put emphasis on the importance of spirituality and to open up the